While serving as a missionary for the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, I had the opportunity to get to know many illegal immigrants. As I got to know them better, I started to sympathize with some of the struggles that they dealt with in their day-to-day lives because of their circumstances. For example, many of these families lived in apartments that were too small. These apartments were not well maintained. They had inadequate heating and cooling systems. They dealt with leaky faucets and noisy neighbors and rattling stairs and all sorts of problems. Furthermore, most of these apartments were in poor neighborhoods because it was all they could afford. As my sympathy for them grew, my interest in the topic of immigration policy in the United States started to grow. When I returned home from my mission, I started doing as much research as I could. I wanted to learn how a person would immigrate to the United States and why so many people choose to come here illegally. My research has led me to conclude that current immigration policy does not extend to the people that it could benefit the most. Furthermore, it holds back our economy and it breaks families apart. Immigration policy is very important. It directly influences the economy and the job market that we're a part of. Therefore, having an understanding of the immigration policy is very important to all of us. My hope today is to show you some of the flaws of the immigration system and to convince you to seek after immigration reform. First, I'd like to discuss the process of actually immigrating to the United States, and I'd like to focus on the process for an unskilled worker. This would be someone who would work on a farm or as a janitor or has no real technical training or technically valuable skills. The first thing to understand is that the process is very complicated. In a report compiled for Congress by immigration expert Ruth Wassum, she stated, "The prospective immigrant must maneuver a multi-step process through federal departments and agencies to obtain legal permanent resident status. Some of these departments include the Department of Homeland Security and the Department of State. There are often multiple agencies to work with within these departments and many complicated forms to fill out. The process is also rather expensive. To get a visa to enter the United States to work will cost around $405. Unfortunately, this high cost is beyond many of the unskilled workers seeking to come here. Their current job situations do not allow them to pay these kind of fees to come to the U.S. to get a better job at higher wages. Also, they must have a sponsor to be able to come into our country. In their Morning Edition program, NPR stated that there are only two ways for an immigrant to come to the United States. They must be sponsored either by an employer or by family here in the U.S. What this means is, unless a person has an existing connection to the United States, they are unable to legally enter the country. This again would offset many of the unskilled workforce in other countries because they may not have those connections due to their lower living standards. Supposing you do have the money to pay the fee and you have connections to the U.S., there are only a limited number of visas to go around. A complicated system of hierarchy and preferences is used to distribute these visas in a way that sometimes doesn't make very much sense. For example, if you are being sponsored by a family member, visas are awarded based on the closeness of the family relationship. For example, a spouse would get a visa before an extended family member such as a cousin or a grandparent. If you are seeking a visa through employment, visas are awarded based on the valuable skill that you could bring to the job market. Again, this means that there are few visas available to unskilled workers seeking to enter the United States. In all of this process, unskilled workers who could benefit from entering the U.S. to get better jobs are not eligible. Part of the reason for this is misunderstandings in the U.S. regarding the impact of unskilled worker immigrants on the economy. For example, many people believe that by adding more unskilled workers to the job force, we would see a reduction in wages for the working class in America. A report by the National Bureau of Economic Research states that this is not true. They say, While more immigrants will reduce the wages of low-wage earners in the U.S., economists have found that immigrants raise average wages slightly for the United States as a whole. Furthermore, by adding more unskilled workers to the U.S., it can increase the purchasing power of American citizens. Patricia Cortez of the University of Chicago has said, "If immigration bids down the price of low-skilled labor, this will reduce the price of unskilled intensive goods and services, thereby raising the welfare of consumers of these goods." In other words, by adding more unskilled workers to the workforce, products and services that these people produce, such as child care or basic food products, will go down, meaning that our dollars go further. Lastly, it is falsely assumed that illegal immigrants do not pay taxes, but this is not true. While the IRS does not keep track of the amount of money that illegal immigrants pay into the tax system, the Institution on Taxation and Economic Policy estimates that last year, illegal immigrants paid around $10 billion into the tax system. If immigration reform were to occur to allow more unskilled workers into our country, they estimate that current tax revenue would increase by $2 billion per year. No one can argue that such revenue would be very helpful, especially as we are facing debt ceilings and debt crises constantly in the government. Lastly, current immigration policy and deportation practices are breaking apart families. Because it is so difficult to enter the United States, frequently a person will come here by themselves. I knew a man whose name was Mario. He had been working in the United States for 8 years without having seen his family during any of that time. Because of this separation from his family, he suffered with severe depression and anxiety. He looked forward to his weekend phone calls and yearned for the day that he could be with his family again. Sometimes, though, families come here together, immigrate to the U.S. together. If the parents are caught, it can cause great problems for the family. I knew a family on my mission where the father was suddenly deported. This left his wife and 3 children without any means of support. Their only options were to pray that he could find a way to come back, or to try to get deported themselves to Mexico. Fortunately, he was able to return, and the family was okay. But a story by the Public Radio International tells of a story that was not so fortunate. In this story, a father was deported. Parents were deported without their children. This meant that their children went into the foster care system. The parents wanted to get custody of their children, but because they were unable to enter the United States, they could not go to court to represent themselves to make a case to gain custody of their children. Fortunately, the court worked it out that they could go and represent themselves, and the children were awarded custody back to the parent, or the parents were awarded custody of their children, and they went back to Mexico. But that is not the case. The story goes on to relay how thousands of children are entered into the foster system every year simply because their parents are deported without them. The current immigration policy is not good for our country. It does not allow unskilled workers who could benefit the most from immigrating into our country. Furthermore, it is holding back our economy and is breaking apart families. With this knowledge, we can seek a change. We can contact our representatives in Congress and urge them to change immigration policy. Furthermore, we can stay educated on current matters regarding immigration so that we can make informed decisions. I am confident that as we make these decisions, we will be able to impact our communities for the better. And what's more, we will be able to have a greater impact on the world community at large. Thank you.